Every day when we get up, we got to face life in a world of racism. And our grandfather faced the same even though he was a serviceman and served his country.
My father fought in 2 world wars and I'm ready for the 3rd one.
Every year, in the chill hour before dawn, at memorials across Australia, crowds gather to observe Anzac Day. April 25 has come to commemorate all wars and all who served. Some here were scarred by war. Most are from families touched by it. And some here remain deeply wounded, not so much by war, but by what happened in peacetime. For Johnny Lovett, it's a day of conflicting emotions.
Very much so, very much so. But there's a lot of pride. Yeah, there's a lot of pride.
Johnny's father, Herbert Lovett, was one of 4 brothers who served in the Australian Imperial Force in World War I.
He was a machine gunner. And the machine gun, of course, was a new type of weapon back in those days. So his life expectancy wasn't very, very good at all.
Somehow, against the odds, all 4 brothers survived. In the army, on the front line, they enjoyed equality with their white comrades. But back home, they again endured a nation deeply divided on racial lines.
They were quite happy to go and defend this country because that put them on some equality and an even keel with white Australia. But that was soon taken away again when they came back from the wars and they were back to being black.
The Lovett brothers were Gundit Mara men from southwestern Victoria. Being Aboriginal meant they weren't classed as Australian citizens. At the end of the war, a grateful nation awarded land allocations to returned soldiers, a way of giving thanks and a means of creating employment. In Victoria, land, often Crown land all over the state, was opened up for soldiers.
There were 11,000 plus soldier settlement applications that were given out to people as farm allotments.
For the Lovett brothers and other Indigenous ex-servicemen, being Aboriginal made them ineligible for a soldier settlement block. During the past decade, Johnny Lovett has sought legal redress for his family's case. In 2012, he unsuccessfully sued the Victorian government for compensation. Now, with Adelaide solicitor Tim Campbell, who's working pro bono, he's mounting a case for a hearing at the federal level.
I know that morally my father is owed by this country for what he did for this country and for what this country had taken from him.
But in Victoria, there were rare exceptions. 2 Aboriginal ex-soldiers did qualify for a soldier settlement block. One, George MacDonald, was a cousin of the Lovetts. And there was this man, Percy Pepper, a Gunai-Kurnai man from eastern Victoria. Cousins Lena Morris and Glenys Watts are proud of their great-grandfather and keen to tell his little-known story.
It's very important to tell to the wider community as well as our own, because it tells the history of what actually happened in Australia to our Aboriginal soldiers that did go to war, and to actually put a face and a life and something behind what they did. This is Grandfather Percy Pepper's logbook of his wages that he got when he went to war. They fought for their country and yet they came back to Australia and weren't really Australian citizens. So it really touches at your heartstrings.
It is great that they're starting to be recognised as serving our country, for our country overseas there. the same as the rest of the soldiers that went to war.
In the terminology of the times, Percy Pepper was classed as a half-caste, namely half white, half black.
His mother was half-caste as well, and that was because her mother had been raped. So that's where the white blood came in, I suppose.
To qualify for the AIF, a soldier had to be substantially of European descent. It meant Percy Pepper was caught between two worlds. Being lighter skinned made him eligible for the army, but under the laws of the day, he was deemed not Aboriginal enough to reside on a mission in his traditional country or to receive government assistance.
Aboriginal people all around Australia were treated like outcasts. They weren't allowed to go into hotels, they weren't allowed to go to the pitches, they had certain areas where they were allowed to attend. And Grandfather Percy, even to get the soldier settlement block, that he had to actually produce 3 or 4 letters of people that were actually going to support him getting a block.
That was trying to build a foundation for himself and his family because of that issue of being caught between two worlds and not able to go back onto the mission.
Percy Pepper had farming experience and a large family to support.
In Percy's case, he also was looking after 7 children, which in itself is quite a challenge, especially with the fact that his wife, Lucy, was sick with tuberculosis, had been a chronic sufferer for many years. You can find all sorts of things here that the government's been up to over the past 200 years.
In the vast underground archive at Victoria's Public Record Office, an official file documents Percy Pepper's journey from 1918, when he was allocated 22 hectares at Kuirup, southeast of Melbourne.
They were starting from scratch. Basically, they've come back from the war and they've gotten this parcel of land. There's not even a home on it. They've got to just make everything up from that basic sort of bare patch of ground, start making a living for themselves, build their own house, right from the ground up, basically.
Percy Pepper's acreage was dark, silty, fertile soil because it was on a floodplain.
It was an actual swamplands, and so all of the land was underwater most of the time. He did start to grow some veggies, potatoes and different things, but 3 times, I think, in the 5 years or 4 or 5 years that he had the property, it was underwater, and it was just so badly underwater.
This modest, now derelict weatherboard house was built by Percy Pepper with his own hands a century ago. In 2012, his descendants made a pilgrimage and began to tell their family story. Like most soldier settlers, Percy Pepper toiled extremely hard to try and make a go of his allocation. Locals tell the story of how he ploughed his fields using a bullock team. He even ran a bicycle shop in town to try and make the repayments. Ultimately, it was all to no avail. Soldier settlement allocations weren't free. They carried interest-bearing loans, but repayments were structured, in theory at least, for the soldier settler to eventually buy the freehold. But the odds were stacked against Percy Pepper. In late 1923, his wife Lucy died. In July 1924, Percy Pepper wrote a heart-wrenching letter to the new Premier of Victoria, pleading his case for more time to meet his repayments, or swap this block for a more manageable, more viable one in a warmer climate. In desperation, he cites his Aboriginality and expresses how it feels it's like having his land stolen for a second time.
He was saying then, you're taking this land away from me. It was already great, Aboriginal land in the first place, and now you're removing it again from me as an Aboriginal person.
He's been lucky enough to be given a parcel of land. It is the land of his ancestors, so he feels a connection to that land, but now, because of no fault of his own really, he's being faced with the prospect of having to let it go again, and that, you can see through the letters that he's writing that he just feels that's very unfair.
Percy Pepper's pleas fall on deaf ears. On the day his block is auctioned, it's under a metre of water. He spends the rest of his life doing labouring jobs. Meanwhile, in Western Victoria, George MacDonald, the other Victorian Aboriginal serviceman, relinquished his soldier settlement allocation. Across Australia, this same story holds true. It's thought New South Wales had just one Aboriginal soldier settler. However, Western Australia was the exception. Recent research has found 9 men of Aboriginal descent were granted soldier settlement blocks. And this salt-scarred land near Kojonup in the West Australian wheatbelt is one of them. This was the 40 hectares granted to Kenneth Farmer. The Farmer family is one of the largest and most prominent clans of the Noongar people of the state's southwest. Today, family elders have gathered here to share their grandfather's little-known story.
Father Farmer gave his, you might as well say he gave his best part of his life for his country. He went and fought for his country. He came back and they awarded him with a piece of land which he's lost.
Kenneth Farmer took up this land in 1922, cleared it and tried to make a living. It was an impossible task. He walked away after a few years. For descendants, the injustice of those times still burns.
How does it make me feel? Well, really, a little bit angry that he was treated that way. Like, as a Noongar person, I feel for my Noongar people, but I also feel for my grandmother who was robbed.
4 Farmer brothers served in World War I. Nearby at Katanning, the War Memorial records the names of Larry and Augustus, both killed in action. In southwest Victoria, perched on a ridgetop overlooking an immense lake teeming with wildlife, the old Lake Conda Mission is a place of immense cultural significance. For Johnny Lovett, it's also a place of sadness and at the very heart of a long-standing injustice. His father and his 3 brothers enlisted again in the Second World War. At war's end, the 800 hectares of adjoining land were cut up for soldier settlement. His father Herbert applied for a block.
And of course, nothing. They cut Lake Conda Mission up into soldier settlement blocks and gave it all to non-Aboriginal soldiers.
At Lake Conda, the timber houses were sold and shifted elsewhere. The bluestone cottages and the mission church destroyed by the authorities. Johnny Lovett was sent to an orphanage. If his father had gained land, he might have stayed closer to his family and not had to roam the country looking for work. He says being part of the stolen generation made him lose connection with country, family, customs, language and traditions. Overall, the soldier settlement scheme post-World War I was far from successful. About half the soldiers granted land met with failure. Around Anzac Day, we hear much about sacrifice, mateship, bravery and Australian values forged in war. The story of soldier settlement challenges some of those accepted notions.
I think the average is about 50% walked off the properties eventually because they couldn't make a go of it.
A century on, Percy Pepper's old house is on its last legs and slated for demolition. The flood-prone swamp was drained long ago and turned into highly valuable farmland. Percy Pepper's story was published a few years ago by the Public Records Office.
My mum and I worked with the Archives of Victoria to actually put that together about the footprints of Lucy and Percy Pepper, and it goes into great detail about getting permission to leave the mission, going back onto the mission, being called half-caste, all about his war days.
But even now, new stories are emerging from official archives.
By putting them online and opening them up for accessibility on the internet means that so many people can actually find out about large chunks of their own history.
Grandfather Ken was very well liked in Katanning.
For the Farmer family, it's harder to pinpoint from the archives why Kenneth Farmer couldn't retain his settler block. But they still ponder what it might have meant had he been able to do so.
We got young boys now who's going a little bit astray. If we had a piece of land, like he left us this piece of land, there's a lot of things that we could do on 100 acre. You could build up programs, you know, for the kids. If you had the land, you'll have collateral to go out and borrow money and set up programs for them. And that'd be a heritage from our grandfather, and we'd be really proud of that.
I think the more involvement we get, the more to the truth we're going to come to, you know, which is a good thing.
We're proud of who we are. I am. I'm proud to be a Noongar. I'm proud of what I am. And I'm sure everyone here is the same. But every day when we get up, we got to face life in a world of racism. And our grandfather faced the same, even though he was a serviceman and served his country.
23 members of the extended Lovett family have gone to war, from the First World War right through to Afghanistan. Johnny Lovett says he'll keep fighting for justice.
My father fought in 2 world wars and I'm ready for the 3rd one. So I can't go back on my word. I've given me word.